Welcome to Founders for School digital events, where we feature a Master of Business to tell their career story and then invite the audience of mainly students up and down the country to ask questions. Today, we're doing something a little bit different as we have Nick Kuenssberg OBE joining us again from his webinar on Wednesday, where he talked about his career. This time he's going to give up his time to talk about all things to do with interviews as part of our masterclass series on navigating the interview process. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, Alison.
My name is Alison Rowan McEwan. I am an engagement manager for Founders for Schools, and I'm hosting today's session. We connect young people to inspiring business leaders to help them understand the world of work a little bit better. We hope by sharing insights and giving lessons and tips that the students are better able to make informed decisions about their futures. And it's always important, but ever more in these times. A little bit of housekeeping first to the audience. Your audio, video and chat functions have been disabled for safeguarding purposes. You can, however, ask questions, which we encourage, but if you'd like, you can also anonymise your details for the questions. We are recording the session and it will be featured on our platform and YouTube channel. So if you would like to watch again, you can do, but in the meantime, sit back and enjoy the webinar and make notes if you'd like. Nick, first of all, let me thank you for giving us your time today. On Wednesday, you shared your story with us, which our audience can now watch online and on YouTube. You talked a lot about the importance of the role sports played in languages in your career story, and you also gave a very whirlwind tour, by the sounds of it, of your rather impressive career, which seems to have taken you around the world and also led you to working in quite diverse industries and organisations. And you've had a really wide career, and you've worked through some very interesting times as well, by the sounds of it. So I do recommend anybody to go back and listen to that. Today, we're going to be talking about interviews, and from both sides of the desk. So it'd be great. We're going to learn a bit of your experience of the interview process and what you think you've done well and what goes well in an interview, and also, very importantly, the things that go wrong, the mistakes, the bad things. Then we'll follow that with some hints and tips to see how the young people can practice before they go into an interview, because the interviews themselves initially can be quite scary. So you're better going in forearmed. If anybody has any questions while Nick is speaking, then please do use the Q&A function on your device. It'll either be at the top or the bottom, and we'll try and get through as many of the questions at the end. But to begin with, Nick, could you please tell us a bit about your experience with interviews?
Thank you very much, Alison. Well, good morning, everybody. I just want to contrast our regular contact with family, friends, colleagues, and people whom we meet in all walks of life with the interview. Because we've grown up with family, we know our friends well, we have a series of shared experiences with colleagues, or come across them on an unplanned basis and without any expectations. These encounters are by and large a pleasure. What is different is the staged meeting that is an interview. Alison said it was scary. Now, this is very different because we want something out of it, whether it's a job, a successful appraisal, a grant, or a sale. We want a hearing, and we want to make an impact which is going to give us a positive result. This result is usually binary. It's either good or bad in terms of the outcome. And the formality of the structure and the formality of the structure and the finality of the decision make this interview process pretty stressful for virtually all of us. So what can we do to reduce the stress and make it possible for the other party to give us that favorable result that we want? Above all, we've got to be very clear about what it is that we want. Is it entry to university? Is it a job? Is it a good appraisal leading to a change in our job, a salary increase, or a promotion? It's important to be clear about that desired result. So I'll describe 4 personal interviews that I referred to in my talk on Wednesday, and it's up to you to analyze why they were successful. Entry to university. I did an entrance scholarship exam. This was 60 years ago, so systems were very different, but I was careful to hedge my bets. While I wrote the papers for French and German languages, I said that I wanted to change to politics, philosophy, and economics. This meant that the so-called general paper was much more important, but I had lots of practice at school, writing 40-minute essays on an unannounced subject. We were just told at the beginning, right, you'll write an essay on this, and we had to go straight into it. So this general paper, plus a lengthy one-to-one interview with the New Zealand Dean of Admissions, covered, as far as I can remember, my travels to France, my non-academic pursuits, my eventual interest in working overseas, and why I wanted to do PPE. Before I left the college, and a week before I would normally have heard, he asked me if I would accept a place. I can honestly admit that this was not based on my academic record, but clearly the interview didn't hurt. Job interviews. My most important interviews were in my final year at university. In theory, I was looking for a job as a graduate management trainee, the bottom rung of the executive ladder. Now, on Wednesday, I talked about having 4 job offers from Shell, BP, Esso, as Exxon was then called, and Coates. In fact, I wasn't looking for a job at the time because I was aiming for a 4th year to study for a diploma in business administration with a dissertation on the recruitment methodologies of large overseas companies. So the pressure really wasn't on me. This meant I was more relaxed and certainly very inquisitive, and possibly asked a few more questions than the interviewers might have expected. These interviews ranged from a day with Shell to 2.5 days with Coates, with a menu of individual and team exercises, impromptu speeches, personality and IQ tests, interviews with personnel, with senior executives, and an in-house industrial psychologist. With the right positive attitude, these were actually fascinating and fun, with interesting groups of fellow candidates, and very helpfully, particularly in the case of Coates, a number of host company managers. This is an ideal system in that the organization gets to know you, and you have a real chance to get to know the organization, its ethos, and the kind of people that they employ. I also, through this process, discovered quite a lot about myself. Because I couldn't actually fund the diploma in the end, I discovered after these sessions that I actually needed a job. I'd actually got 4 offers from those interviews. So how did I choose? And this is also interesting. Shell struck me as being too big, and I felt that I could only be a very small cog in a very large wheel. Esso was based on the South Coast and wanted to make me an engineer and wanted me to go to the Middle East immediately, which frankly, I didn't fancy. BP I liked very much, but they wanted to pay us according to the quality of our final degree. As I said before, I wasn't a scholar, so I wasn't too optimistic. So I objected, saying that they'd done enough tests on us all to know whether they wanted us or not. Interestingly, about 8 years later, I had a letter from the head of personnel who'd been involved with those interviews, who wrote to me saying that they had in fact changed their policy to a unified salary offer. Coates, they'd started their graduate management training years before all the others and had a very good recommendation and were recommended by consultants. I liked their relaxed style and the people that they fielded. And the first 2 years training in Glasgow suited me for reasons related to my girlfriend and to sport, with overseas postings afterwards. As I explained on Wednesday, I was in Belgium within 3 months, but that's another story. And I never had any qualms at all about my choice of coats. Third, promotion. After 3 years in Peru, I was about to go on general training, which technically prepared you for being a number one, as we called our managing directors, or a divisional director in a much larger market. I had just been appointed finance director in Brazil, a big step up from Peru, and was going to do a 3-month executive course at Manchester Business School and 3 months working alongside another number one before the Brazilian job. Now, my then managing director in Peru was not comfortable in his job and frankly, not very good. But after 2 weeks of farewell parties and a week before departing Peru and going on leave to Barbados en route for business school and general training, there was a coded cable from head office. The thrust of this, which I had to decode because I had the code book, was that the managing director was to go to Australia as deputy managing director there, and I was to stay on as acting general manager. I told the managing director I was not going to do this, and I was going to ring the personnel director in Glasgow. He, the managing director, was livid and forbade me. I rang anyway, which took a day to organize, bearing in mind that this was 1971. So, a difficult interview, but on my terms. The personnel director in Glasgow said he'd been expecting me to get in touch, as he'd had nothing to do with the change of plan. I told him that I needed my first leave after 3 years and wanted to do business school and number one training and was not prepared to be a pawn in the game. After some discussion, we came to an agreement. I would indeed go on leave, go to Manchester Business School, have a couple of weeks with the Venezuela number one, and then return to Peru as managing director, not acting general manager, for a maximum of 2 years. All in all, a good outcome that certainly did my career prospects no harm. And finally, a change of course. This was an important interview when I was summoned from Milan to head office. Those who listened on or watched on Wednesday will have heard that I had a set two with the head of Europe, and I thought I was going to be fired. In fact, over a 2.5-hour interview with both the managing director and the personnel director, I was offered the chance of a new job to implement a totally new role as overseas finance director, which was something that I had told head office that I believed the group needed. There were overseas sales and manufacturing directors, but nothing in the finance arena. I explained I thought that this was a great idea, but I also made it clear that I enjoyed general management, and as a result was able to persuade them that I could and should take on responsibility for the non-textile interests of the group. I must have been convincing using my various experiences in Peru, Chile, Colombia, and Italy, as well as my role in 2 European acquisitions, which demonstrated a relevant skill set because they agreed. Now, my personal experience of failed interviews, and I'm going to do it first as an interviewer and secondly as an interviewee.
Okay.
As an interviewer at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, a potential governor who was extremely well qualified and had the right experience thought that they would walk into the job. In front of the interview panel, they demonstrated, however, that they had done no homework and knew little about the Conservatoire and had not thought about the implications of the role. The individual realized immediately and later apologized to me for having let me as well as themselves down. In Social Investment Scotland, we had an extremely well-prepared candidate for a senior executive role, but it turned out that he had not understood the ethos of social enterprise and was disappointed at the remuneration level, despite the fact that the salary range had been identified in the job advertisement. Clearly, neither of them got the job. At Coates, we had, as I've already explained, our 2-day selection board, usually in a hotel. And in those cases, there were a couple of potential graduate management trainees, one who drank too much and flirted with not one, but both of the female personnel officers in attendance, while another demonstrated a damning inability to listen to what any of his fellow candidates had to say and was clearly no team player. And then another case, our in-house industrial psychologist suggested that this particular individual thought himself so much cleverer than his fellow candidates and suggested that intellectual arrogance had no part to play in the Coates group. Incidentally, we always ask the female personal assistants present about the behavior of the individuals and their intuition about the candidates. And we rarely, if ever, took on somebody who generated the wrong vibes. Right, personal failure as an interviewee. First of all, Scottish Water. I'd been deputy chairman of the Scottish Environment Protection Agency and felt I knew something about the water industry and that I was a strong candidate for a board directorship there. On arrival for the interview, I knew 3 of the 4 members of the panel and shook their hands. I obviously went to shake hands with the 4th, only to find that they were wearing dark glasses and didn't realize what I was doing because they were blind. I also went on to discuss my political views on the future of the water industry, which were not aligned to the government's views at that time. I didn't get the job. Arriva. This was an interview, again, to be a board member of a very large English privatized transport company, just like Stagecoach up here. Thinking that I was well qualified, having been a director of 2 regulated industry boards, Scottish Power and the aforesaid SEPA, I found myself flummoxed by being asked detailed questions about the English scene. I had not done my homework and it showed. I wasn't made an offer there either. So the summary, it's absolutely vital to prepare for these interviews. And I would split the factors into research and hygiene, which are entirely under your control, and therefore you can reduce the stress. And then issues relating to performance and some reminders about things which are less easy to control. And Alison will make available to you a document at the end, which will cover all of these points. But to go through them very quickly, first of all, research on the organization and your preliminary homework. Look at the website. In today's world, there's a huge amount of information available, which wasn't available in my day. Look at the people who are running the organization, including the latest appointments. Don't be unaware that there's a new chairman or a new chief executive. Know what it is that you want. What is the job? What is it that you want to do with the organization? Complete a specific CV for that job. It's no good just producing a generalized CV which you float in front of everybody. You have to do it for the particular job that you're going for. And write a short but relevant application letter with appropriate references to your CV, explaining why you want the job and why you are the candidate for that job. Then the hygiene factors, again, all under your control. Ensure that you know exactly where you're going for the interview and when. Turn up well ahead of time. You may find you're in a big organization and you're being sent to some other office and you've got to find your way there. You don't budget for that. Make sure you give yourself time. Dress smartly, clean iron shirt or blouse, clean shoes, clean fingernails, clean shaven or a neat beard. Don't smoke, don't chew gum. And remember to take your application letter and CV with you. They may well refer to those in the interview. And you don't want to be remembering an application letter for some other organization. Right, performance. When you're there, be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't put on an act. Look your interviewer or interviewers in the eye. Smile occasionally. Remember the names of the interviewers. They should introduce themselves. If you didn't pick it up, ask them to repeat it. Answer their questions succinctly. Don't waffle. Waffle suggests you don't know, and the interviewer and the panel will turn off. Stay on the subject. Don't play the political game. I don't know the answer to that. The question that you should have been asking me is this. Read their body language. As soon as they've got their arms folded, they've lost interest. If you see them looking at their watch, you're clearly either waffling or you're talking too much. Their sideways glances at their fellow interviewees, the fellow interviewers will tell you a lot about whether you're engaging with them. Make sure that you take the opportunity to explain why you are the right candidate for them. And don't be afraid to say you don't know. There's no crime not to know, but don't waffle. And there are a number of important things to remember. First of all, the interviewer or interviewers may be saying up to 8 candidates that day. So you want to be the one that stands out. Interviewers usually want the candidates to do well. Even if they've decided that you're not the person for the job, the last thing they want is to be embarrassed because a candidate is irrelevant, is not doing what you want, etc. An interviewer wants you to do well. The interviewer is looking for past performance as a guide to potential. They want to understand what you can be doing in the future for them. And it's important that your past performance relates to that. Your outside interests are relevant and they'll want to know about that, but it's not necessarily that they should be related to the activities of that particular organization, but they want to know that you're a complete person and not just a nerd. Identify your USP, as I've said, and ensure that the interviewer understands it. Above all, the interview for a job is a two-way street. It's for you to find out about the organization as well. You'll have the opportunity. It's a very poor interview if you're not given the opportunity to ask questions, probably at the end. Have your questions ready. Do not ask about holidays or about sick leave. Don't ask for information that's on the website unless it's in reference to another question that you want to ask. Yes, do ask about pensions, do ask about salary policy, do ask about training. And quite legitimate to ask about the timeline for when you're going to hear the result. At the end, state clearly that you are still, or you are not, interested in the job and why, and then thank the interviewer at the end. And if appropriate, follow it up with a letter or an email of thanks, saying you acknowledge the opportunity, you enjoyed the event, and give them any other relevant statement of interest that may back up your particular desire to join that organization. Now, as I've said, you've got all of that in writing, which Alison will make available to you. So I hope that and the reflections on my own experience may have been helpful to you.
Yeah, and we've got lots of questions. So I'm going to quick fire through as many as we can. So I think short answers, definitely better, because you do have quite a few and you have answered some already while you were talking. Do you think a good interview relies more on your experience or the way you present yourself?
You have to have had the experience in order to get to the interview. And if you've produced a reasonably detailed CV, he or she will want to explore that with you to find out that it is legitimate, that you have reflected on it, that you have learned from it. One of the points I was making on Wednesday is that you're learning throughout your career. Presentation is, however, important. I don't say one is more important than the other. You have to have had the experience to have got there. But how you present yourself and how you answer the questions is extremely important. I've made a couple of points. Don't waffle, answer the questions, be succinct, be clear, and that's the way to get your points over.
Okay, and on that, kind of related, do you think it's okay for a candidate to take notes in that can help them answer any interview questions they get?
I think it's legitimate if you just jot down a couple of points, but what you don't want to do is to start getting your head down and writing an essay while the interview is happening all about you.
Okay, and do you think there's any different tips if you're taking part in a telephone interview, or do you think it's just the same?
That's interesting. Hopefully nowadays it would actually be a Zoom interview so that you are actually seeing your interviewer. But reflecting, I at one stage had to do a very important telephone interview and had to do it in Spanish. I was going for a job with Iberdrola, who are the owners of Scottish Power. And that is significantly more difficult because you don't see the body language of the individual. However, it is said that people can tell more accurately about whether or not you're lying from your voice than from looking at you. Okay. I suspect other than appearances, all of the tips that I've given you still apply. Obviously on the phone you can do it in your pajamas, but I would suggest that all the other points that I've made apply just as appropriately.
Okay, and if you're interviewing for a job in another country, do you think it's important to speak the language of the country or the company of the country you're interviewing in, or do you think that's English is fine?
It totally depends on the ethos of the organization. If you're going to an American company, the odds are that it will be in English because very few of them will probably speak the local language. They will normally indicate that they expect you, if they're wanting to do it in a foreign language, they would tell you. I've just talked, as it happens, about my interview with Iberdrola, which I absolutely assumed that it would be in Spanish, and it was in Spanish. At the end, this was with the secretary to the board, and at the end, he said, we had about 40 minutes, and he said, actually, you know, I speak very good English, as you will gather, but it was a delight to be able to talk to you in Spanish. So that obviously gained me lots of brownie points. I should add, I didn't get that job because I didn't wear a skirt. I was told by the headhunter afterwards that the company had a board of 12, all male, and they desperately wanted a female, and they found a female.
Okay. Well, as a female, that's encouraging but disappointing for you. What do you feel was important, or what was the most important reason for you getting the 4 applications or 4 job offers when you did your interviews round about the end of your university career?
I think 2 reasons. One, I was obviously the kind of person that an overseas company was looking for. Somebody reasonably self-sufficient, self-confident, moral and physical courage, but also, as I tried to put across, the fact that I wasn't actually going for the job. I was going to learn about the process and their methodologies, meant I was much more relaxed than I might have been, and meant that I asked a lot more questions than I might have done if I'd been desperately keen to get that job.
Okay, so questions help. So we have 3 more questions left, but we're just slightly over time. So I would like a yes or no answer for these 3 questions as a quick fire. Do you think psychometric testing is infallible?
Not infallible, but very helpful.
Okay. Would you say that interviews are the most important stage of your entire job career?
In terms of opening doors for me, absolutely.
Okay. And would you use, which social media platform would you recommend for researching the people in an organization with whom you have an interview?
Oh, I would go to the company website.
Okay. And someone has sneaked in a little last thing is, do you think notes in an interview will be the norm? I think they're following up on another question about the...
It's perfectly legitimate to do some quick scribbles, but as I said, do it while you're still looking at them, just to remind you about points you want to make.
Okay. Well, fantastic.
Sorry, just
yep.
Perfectly legitimate to take notes in with you, so that I've been as an interviewer, not as an interviewee. Somebody has come in with lots of documents with little post-its identifying where they had made comments and so on, and they used that as a prompt, but throughout the time they were able to engage with the interviewer or the interviewing panel in that case.
Okay, good. Well, we have got through all the questions, so that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Nick. You're going to be back with us again on Tuesday morning at 11:30 to do a interview masterclass with our founder, Sherry. So if anybody online would like to sign in for that as well, then please do register on our website. Thank you for joining us, everybody who's been listening. Nick, thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. Pleasure. We will put the recording on our platform and YouTube once we have it all ready and processed. And I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday in your webinar then. Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.